US and NATO troops start to withdraw from Afghanistan. They leave behind a resurgent Taliban and Afghans living in fear. So what needs to be done to keep the country safe? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. It's being called the beginning of the end for America's longest war. US soldiers have started leaving Afghanistan over the past week. Now, President Joe Biden promised all troops will be gone by September the 11th, 2021. 20 years after the attacks, that triggered the fight against the Taliban. 7,000 NATO personnel will leave as well. But as they go, the Taliban is launching more attacks. The UN says the number of people killed or injured is up by a third compared to this time last year. The US Defense Secretary admits Afghan security forces face a major task ahead.
We will remain partners with the Afghan government, with the Afghan military, and certainly we hope through our continued support the Afghan security forces can be effective. But it's they have a pretty significant capability, but it's going to, we expect that this will be a challenge for them.
Afghans who've helped foreign soldiers over the years are scared of reprisal attacks from the Taliban. Many have applied to move to the US, but their applications are stuck in a bureaucratic backlog. Filio Conchafouri reports from Kabul.
Arzu knew she was risking it all when she started working as a contractor for the US government. Her house has been attacked, and she's received many threats. Her supervisor suggested she apply for a special immigrant visa for herself and her family to safely move to the U.S. That was in 2017. She's still waiting for approval.
In this country, most of the people are not agree, even the women who work for Afghans. The worst thing is that the situation is getting worse day by day. And as we all know, the Taliban will take over the government. So what will happen to our lives? The main thing which I'm concerned is about myself and my family's security. Who would take this responsibility? Because most of the people can recognize me, even though I'm hiding myself, but I cannot guarantee that.
Arzu is one of about 18,000 Afghans who have worked alongside U.S. troops, diplomats and other government personnel and are awaiting decisions on those special immigrant visas. The process is long and grueling. A report published in early April found the program ineffective in addressing the needs of those applying.
By law, the application process should take 9 months. But on average, it takes 4 years, if not more. Since the announcement of the troop withdrawal, the U.S. State Department has said it is aware of the risks Afghan visa applicants face and that it is committed to the program.
But it has yet to commit to any concrete reforms to address the backlog or accelerate visa approval. As U.S. troops withdraw, pressure from Congress and organizations, including No One Left Behind, has been mounting.
If we don't do anything, if we do not expedite this process, I'm pretty much sure after the withdrawal, they will be tortured and killed in front of their family, and their videos will be uploaded on the social media for other people to not support the US government in the future.
Dozens of Afghans who worked with Australian troops in Afghanistan are also pleading to have their protection visa applications processed. The Taliban considers those Afghans who worked with the U.S. and other foreign countries as traitors and has vowed retribution against them. Dozens of Afghan interpreters and contractors have already been killed, several while waiting for their visas.
I have no option. The option I have is the only way to die here in this country or get my visa to have safe life in the States.
Since 2009, when the visa program was established, thousands of Afghans, many with their families, have relocated to the United States. And Arzu, along with thousands of others, desperately want to join them before it's too late. Filio Conchafouri, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining us in Pittsburgh, Colin Clarke. He's a senior research fellow at the Soufan Center, which is dedicated to increasing awareness of global security challenges in the United States and globally. In Nice, Victoria Fontan. She's a professor of peace studies at the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul. And in Doha, Sultan Barakat. He's the director at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. A warm welcome to you all. Let's begin in Pittsburgh with Colin Clarke. This administration particularly is pushing the fact that the Afghans can do this themselves, that the Afghan security forces are ready to do this themselves. We heard from the US Secretary of Defense saying they have the capability to be able to do it. What do you make of that?
I respectfully disagree. I think if you watch what has happened in Afghanistan over the years, you watch the Afghan National Security Forces, who are clearly brave and courageous. They need the help and the assistance of the United States military, not only in day-to-day operations, but in those critical over-the-horizon operations. And I'd say particularly in areas like ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
But then you're looking at a situation where they're always going to be needed, so they're never going to leave. I mean, at some point, 20 years after the fact, you can understand why this administration said, you know what, enough is enough.
I totally understand, and I empathize, and I hope it works out. I just disagree with the decision. I completely agree with you. When you look at a calendar-based withdrawal versus a conditions-based withdrawal, many argue, and it's a credible argument, that the conditions will never be there. I go back to the fact that there are still U.S. troops in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. I don't hear people raising issues about that. So why would 20 years be the magic number for Afghanistan when clearly the Afghan security forces aren't yet ready to stand on their own?
Let's bring in Victoria Fontan here in Nice. Now, you're normally based in Kabul. You're the professor of peace studies at the American University in Afghanistan, in Kabul. That's the kind of institution that is likely to be attacked if the Americans leave, because you'll still be there and you'll be a symbol of America in Kabul. Are you worried?
Absolutely, we are worried. We were attacked in 2016. We lost 15 students and faculty at that time, and many more were wounded. And we know that some of our faculty members, national faculty members, have been the target of intimidations and threats in the past few months. And of course, we're worried that this withdrawal is going to impact our national faculty as well as our students who are risking their lives every day to come and study at AUAF. So this is a big concern of ours, and we are looking into different scenarios for the future at the time, in the time being. And but we will resume and continue our operations and look ahead for not to break our promise to both our students, staff, and faculty.
I mean, Victoria, that's a very personal kind of take on that, and thank you for that. It's very important as well. But generally speaking, with the people that you speak to, there must be those who say enough is enough. The Americans, NATO, they must leave. We need to be able to do this ourselves, particularly within the Afghan government.
Yes, absolutely. And we hear that every day. And the op-ed written by President Ghani was very clear with regards to this. And so there is a fatigue on both sides, the Afghan side and also the international side. But at the same time, we have sold a dream. The job is not done. The Afghan security forces are not capable of maintaining the security of the country. The Taliban feel emboldened by this conditionless withdrawal. And so in that light, things are very difficult at the moment, and many are very pessimistic, even though we do understand that Afghans need to stand on their own 2 feet, of course.
Well, let's bring in Sultan Barakat. He's in Doha joining us now. Sultan, we're in a position where there are about 50 to 60,000 fighters with the Taliban. They control some parts of the country, but they don't control other parts of the country. The entire country of Afghanistan isn't unified by any means. A third of it remains lawless, and the rest of it is allegedly or supposedly controlled by the Afghan government. We had several rounds of talks here in Doha between the Taliban and the Americans. No agreement, no real agreement was ever reached between the two. And now we have this announcement that the Americans are simply leaving come September the 11th, 2021. Do you think the Americans have played it the right way?
Well, obviously they played it the right way as far as American interest is concerned. So American interest first. I think this is all what they can do, and the way they've announced a deadline and linked that to another symbolic day in the American memory is an indication of that. But I agree with the other speakers that there is a major risk here for those who live in Afghanistan. At the same time, we must keep in mind that the role of the American forces has fundamentally changed since 2014 onwards. They're no longer on the front lines. They're not really directly in fighting or with the Taliban. Their role and NATO have changed into a support and advice mission. For the last few years, it's been the Afghan National Army who's paying the price, and it's these people who've been fighting directly with the Taliban. Now, the principle that the Taliban have been holding so far is that they are fighting against occupation, and they see that their brothers and sisters have been pushed in front of them and the middle between them and the Americans. Now the time, if the Americans are withdrawing, I think the Taliban will have much less legitimacy in continuing their fight, and they will have to seek a solution where they can come together with the rest of the Afghans on an agreed arrangement for security and stability of the country. Keeping in mind that it's not just the Taliban as a military force or that exists at the moment. There are many other groups that have risen, and there are many that have gone back and rearmed over the last 2 years, specifically because of those concerns.
But Sultan, you say that the Taliban and other groups are simply fighting an occupation in their country, get rid of the occupation, and then there's no longer a reason to fight. But that wasn't the case in 1992. They were fighting to take power in 1992, and the Taliban succeeded. They took over nearly 2/3 of the country. What's to stop them doing it once the Americans leave?
Well, as far as I know, the Taliban were not part of the fight in 1992. The Taliban risen as a result of the Mujahideen having had a go at each other, seeking power. And the Taliban really came to existence because of the insecurity that left, the gap insecurity that was created in the country. As far as we are aware, and as far as they've been making of statements, their objective is simply to turn around the occupation. Now, of course, the temptation of power is always there. The temptation of forcing one's opinion is always there. But we can only judge by what statements they have put to the public. And it is very unfortunate that over the last year or so of negotiations, they haven't been forthcoming in clarifying their positions, in comforting people back in Afghanistan, because ultimately they all need to live together. And if there is an ambition to be a major force in power or to control the country and so on, they need to understand that they cannot control the country by force. They have to be able to govern the country properly. They have to be able to manage its resources, meet the needs of its people. Any assumption that they are capturing power that comes with wealth is obviously mistaken. Afghanistan is in a great debt. They need to understand how that debt will be managed. The government on its own is incapable of providing services to the millions of Afghans across the country right now with all the Western support. So imagine if they were to turn against their own people and against the Western support, how will they provide for their fellow Afghans?
Victoria, let me bring you in here. You were shaking your head and nodding at some points that Sultan Barakat was making there. Are you worried then that the Taliban aren't trustworthy? I mean, let's face it, the intra-Afghan dialogue, the talks, haven't come to any fruition as of yet. Those talks are still going on. There was a process in Istanbul just very recently. Are you afraid that those talks will fail and that there will be a split within the Afghan themselves?
Well, absolutely. Everybody's worried back in Kabul about that. And the indication that the Taliban gave by being unwilling to come to the negotiation table in Istanbul was very clear. They indicated that since the withdrawal was now going to happen, they no longer needed to discuss with anyone about any future, let's say, political accommodation in Afghanistan for peace. And so from that perspective, everybody's worried because actions speak louder than words, even though we haven't even had any words with respect to this. And right now, there is no indication that there will even be an idea of a power sharing. And so everybody is worried, and it would be high time for the Taliban to actually clearly indicate what their intentions are. For the moment, they have not. There has only been statements here and there, and those statements are not encouraging. At the same time, there has been a wave of targeted assassinations against civil society individuals, journalists, and intellectuals. And so that definitely is also an indication of what is to come, and the fact that an inclusive society is definitely not on the horizon if the Taliban were to come back. So they'd better be very clear about what they want, but I don't agree that they are willing to share any power at this time.
Colin Clarke in Pittsburgh, one of the mistakes I feel that many people have said to me that the Americans have made when negotiating with the Taliban is to consider them a unified monolith, that they are actually all together. We saw this in the Doha talks, where often an agreement would be reached and then the Taliban representatives here in Doha would have to say, well, we need to go back to Afghanistan and we need to sell this to our people, and therefore an agreement wasn't reached because they never actually managed to get that agreement. Do you think the United States has underestimated how disunified and how much of a threat the Taliban are because they are not a monolith?
Absolutely. I think the United States still fails after 2 decades in Afghanistan to fully grasp and understand the organization that they're at odds with. And I think that also goes for Al-Qaeda. I think it goes for the Haqqanis and several other kind of non-state actors operating in Afghanistan and throughout the broader region. Just one point I'd like to raise when we're talking about, can we take the Taliban at their word? Are they a credible broker? Look, the Taliban still has not renounced Al-Qaeda, and few people suspect that once the United States withdraw, the Taliban will break with them. There's no indication that they will. So the U.S. is leaving at a time when Al-Qaeda is hurting, but I fully suspect that or expect Al-Qaeda to regenerate its networks in Afghanistan and throughout South Asia.
But Colin, one of the things, and I do want to come to you all with this question, but let me just ask Colin first. We have to take a look at the regional players as well. You have Pakistan. And when you're talking about the Haqqani network, often Pakistan are accused of supporting the Haqqani network. You have Iran, accused of supporting the Northern Alliance and other factions. And then you have India, which sees Afghanistan as a very strategic place to try and battle their competition with Pakistan itself. The regional players are likely to replace NATO and America when America leaves, perhaps not with troops on the ground, but certainly with influence. Is that a factor in America's thinking?
It could be, but it actually, I spent 10 years at the RAND Corporation doing research on insurgency and counterinsurgency. And one of the main takeaways from years and years of research of looking at data is that the more players that are involved in a civil war, the more external actors, the longer that conflict will last, and often the bloodier it will be. So if the United States is banking on quote unquote regional players without a military presence, but with influence, then I think that assumption is fully mistaken.
Victoria Fontan, this idea of these regional players, particularly within Kabul, within the administration, has always been very controversial. The Afghans have been openly critical of the Pakistanis for supporting various groups in the country, yet they've been left with little choice and they've had to go to India for investment. There is a new great game that is being played out. It used to be Russia and Britain, Russia and America, and now it's between these regional players. That's not going to be helpful for peace, is it?
Well, absolutely not, especially if those regional players are at odds with one another. However, the new influence of China could be a game changer, since Pakistan also needs China at the moment. So it remains to be seen. But definitely what's important to understand, and what Afghans understand really well, is that those regional players do not have Afghanistan at the core of their thinking. They care more about their own influence, their regional infighting, than Afghanistan itself. And so that is something that I think is going to have an impact in the months to come, and that I hope will influence the Afghan political scene to actually unify and seek for, let's say, a state response to the Taliban rise in the future. And so that is something that remains to be seen, but quite hopeful.
Sultan, what do you think? Regional players, help or hindrance?
I think Afghanistan has had always a challenge with its collection of neighbors. And unfortunately, there continue to be a mixed reaction, mix of attitudes towards the end of the conflict in Afghanistan. But for the first time in a long time, we have now reached a stage where the global context, the change in circumstances, is helping everyone to go more or less in the same direction. There are still some differences between certain neighbors and some who are pursuing their national interest at the expense of the Afghans. But overall, I think the position is much better than it was for many years ago. The real challenge now is on the Afghans themselves. They need to come up with a position, and I think the responsibility has really got to go back to the Afghans. For many years, they have relied on international actors in one way or the other, and it is time to realize that no one is there for free. No one is there for out of interest for any minority group in Afghanistan genuinely. And it is only a national vision, I think, will help pull the country together. And as I said earlier, with the removal of the label of occupation, I think that should, at least in principle, take away one of the fundamental reasons that the Taliban and other groups have been using for a long time as an excuse for engaging in war.
Colin, Clarke, just very quickly, because we are running out of time. Do you think the American government, this administration, realised that if there is an Afghan peace agreement, intra-Afghan peace agreement between the Taliban, various other groups and the Afghan government, that it might not come at the expense that they want? It might not come by denouncing ISIL and other groups. It might not come at denouncing Al-Qaeda. It might just be that the Taliban win everything that they want. They become a regional power in Afghanistan, and the Americans just have to deal with it. Do you think they realise that?
Yeah, I think that's one scenario that's being discussed. And from folks that I speak to in Washington, there seems to be confidence within this administration that they can manage the threat. They think it's a threat that can be managed by an offshore counterterrorism strategy, but only time will tell.
I want to thank all our guests, Colin, Clarke, Victoria Fontan and Sultan Barakat. And thank you too for watching. You can see this and all our previous programmes again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.